are so pleased that you could come, and we are so pleased to have Dana Spiotta with us. Dana is an acclaimed author, and she's written a book called WAYWARD, which inspires so much discussion. There are so many issues in this book, and we hope to cover some of them. I'd like to also recognize Debbie Honorath, who is my partner in crime and co-coordinating the author series with us. Just to give you a little bit of Dana's background, Dana Spiotta is the author of 5 novels, including the new one, WAYWARD. She has also written Innocence and Others, winner of the St. Francis College Literary Prize, and a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Stone Arabia, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Eat the Document, which was finalist for the National Book Award and the winner of the American Academy's Rosenthal Foundation Award. And Lightning Fields, New York Times notable book. Other awards include a Guggenheim Fellowship, a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, the Rome Prize in Literature. Oh, I'm just overwhelmed by all this. Premio Priva, a Creative Capital Award, and the John Updike Prize from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. I'm sure I could go on, but we have so many questions to ask you, Dana, about your new book. And before we even start, would you like to read a little bit from it?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you, Harriet, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm going to read. So some of you may have read the book, but I'm assuming many of you haven't. It's about a woman who has she's in her 50s. She's going through perimenopause, and she's kind of in a bit of a crisis, I guess you would say. And she's in, her daughter is 16 going on 17, and they're estranged. And in this chapter, she's remembering when her daughter was 14. So that's all you really need to know for this section. It's about a 5-minute reading. Allie had pounded down the stairs in a rush to get a ride to the mall where she could hang out with her friends. It was the first time with no parental supervision, just $20 for food at the food court with all the other teenagers. She burst into the kitchen where Sam sat. Allie wore a little kilt that hit mid-thigh and a little sweater with a V-neck that revealed the peach-white curves of her upper breasts. A pendant hung between them, a puffy red enamel heart dangling from a gold chain, a vintage necklace Sam had bought, and she got a little familiar jolt of pleasure whenever Allie wore something she had given her. Pathetic, really, but there it was. And so Sam started with a compliment. "Oh, you're wearing the heart necklace." Shortly before Allie had gotten her period, her body had changed dramatically. From her childish androgyny emerged long, elegant legs, a tiny waist, and high, small breasts that required a bra. Her skin never had a blemish, and no weird adolescent awkward nose, just a luminous, poreless, doll face, still round and babyish, but attached to this new body. What had been childish became suddenly nubile, suggestive, sexual. This combination terrified Sam. "Honey, I can see your bra with that sweater," Sam said. Allie sighed. "No, you can't." She pulled on the shoulders of her sweater so the V covered more. "And stop looking at my chest." What could Sam say to that, really? "You need to put on a cami or a tank top under that sweater if you want to wear it to the mall." "Are you kidding?" "Allie, the tight sweater and the booty skirt send a message to the world that you are looking for attention," Sam said. "To your body," she added, and then regretted the addition. "Then the world is perverted. How is that my fault? Should I be ashamed of my body?" "No, of course not," Sam said. "Then why should I cover up?" And it was a fair point. Why should she accommodate the leering of men? Why was it her problem and not theirs? Could Sam tell Allie that Allie had not landed on her outfit choices in a vacuum? That how she thought she ought to look, that the skirt and the low-cut sweater had been thrust on her from cultural corners that commodified misogyny into mall rat aesthetics? Sam could not. Sam tried out another tack, though it did sound undeniably retrograde as it fell from her mouth. In an ideal world, you wouldn't have to, but we don't live in an ideal world, and you don't realize how stressful it feels to have men hit on you. Sam sighed. Allie frowned at her, her arms folded in front of her chest. Sam tried again, although more talking seldom led to a good outcome with Allie. Sam couldn't stop herself from believing that everything could be talked out. Remember I said either the top or the bottom can be revealing, but not both? Remember? But the combination of the booty skirt with the tight low-cut sweater will attract not just the attention of boys your age, but men your dad's age, and it isn't always easy to handle. Ooh, just stop, okay? I'll change my sweater because the world is full of pedos, I guess. She stomped upstairs. Why don't you just buy me a burqa? She shouted from the second floor. And we're going to be late now. Also, it isn't a booty skirt. That isn't even a thing. Sam had hated this whole exchange, that she felt the need to cover her daughter up because Allie didn't yet understand how unsafe the world was for her. But mothers must operate from realpolitik, not ideology. Just as when Allie goes to college, Sam will tell her daughter not to get drunk at a frat party and to have a buddy system. And if that makes it seem like the potential victim needs to adjust her behavior instead of the boys, so be it. The system that makes sexual predators and encourages grown men to leer at 14-year-old girls should change. But Sam had no control over frat boys looking for the drunkest girl in the room. Sam had no control over grown-ass men at the mall. Sam only had control over her daughter. A mother cannot take chances with their daughter. Mothers cannot afford to be sentimental about how the world should be. I guess I'll stop right there.
Well, that is one of my most favorite sections, Dana, simply because I have a daughter and I've gone through the teenage years with my daughter, as I'm sure many people have. And also because it seems to me that the heart of your novel is the mother-daughter relationship. That somehow our character, Sam, the young woman, Sam, I call her a young woman, although she's in midlife, but to me, she's a young woman, and to many of our audience, she may be a young woman, but she's going through a sort of midlife crisis, and she leaves her marriage and her daughter. And one of the hearts, certainly, of the novel is how much she really does care about her daughter and how that resolves itself at the end. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Did you start off with that?
Well, it's a good question. Thank you, Harriet. I had originally thought that the novel would be narrated from Sam. I knew she would have a daughter, and I was interested in this time of life where you have where your parents are getting older and fading, and your child is getting ready to go off into the world, and right at that same time, you're kind of going through, if you have menopausal symptoms and you can't sleep. Sam can't sleep. And it seemed like, a lot all at once. So I think that's sort of precipitates the crisis. And I think she thinks she's just leaving her husband and that her daughter will somehow come with her, but her daughter doesn't. Her daughter's furious at her and won't speak to her. And so Sam ends up just sending her a text every night, and Allie doesn't respond. And they have to eventually reconcile. Yeah. So I think it is it's definitely the kind of arc of the book is about the mother-daughter relationship. Yeah.
And she also learns that she can't overprotect her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is so interesting to me. When you're 16, 17, your brain, I remember that age very well, and your brain is top notch. But you have no experience, right? And but you don't know what you don't know. And so it's kind of a dangerous time. And I think the irony in the book is that Sam really can't protect her from the world. Allie's got to make her own mistakes. Allie's got to find out about the world for herself. And so in a way, I think Sam knows the best thing for Allie is if she isn't overbearing, isn't in her face all the time. It's just very hard to stop wanting to keep your daughter from making mistakes. And Allie is very resilient, and she is making mistakes. But I think by the end of the book, you see that her values are not really that far from her mother's, but she just needed a little oxygen to kind of figure it out. You know, she just needed a little space for herself. And I think that Sam uses her daughter in a way to avoid thinking about her own life, you know, her own mistakes.
And for those people who have not read the book, Allie does make quite a big mistake in having an affair with an old man who uses her for his own pleasure and gratification or whatever. And Sam doesn't react as insanely as she might.
Right. Yeah. I think by that time, when she finally sees Allie with Joe, she's in a different place than where she started out. She's kind of seeing, I think, things from a bigger perspective because of all the stuff that happened to her. She moves to, into the city and buys this dilapidated house that she falls in love with. And the neighborhood is really, a fraught neighborhood with a lot of poverty and violence. And she starts to sort of see her own privilege in a different way. And she doesn't have, I think, the same energy for that helicopter parenting that she had in the beginning. I think she starts to sort of see things in perspective. And I think she has the impulse to still, she's still upset that this is the case, but I think she also thinks, okay, I'm not going to interfere. I'm going to let Allie figure it out. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the book is about Allie, but also a lot of it is about just Sam trying to figure out what she's going to do with the rest of her life. What's her place, not just in her family, but in the culture as an aging woman. And in the age, it takes place in 2017, so it's after the Trump election, and there's a lot of cultural. There's a lot. Well, I think we all remember how intense that was, and I think she's trying to figure out how to be a sort of good mother, good citizen, good daughter, all of those things.
Yeah, and you do describe a very haywire, chaotic world, and it starts with the surprise that Hillary Clinton doesn't get elected. I think that's a surprise for many of us. We all sort of expected that this would be the first woman president, and I remember taking my daughter to some event in which Hillary Clinton was there, and my daughter was a young woman, and I wanted to take her, and I said, "This is the first woman president that we're going."
Yeah.
And I think it was very disappointing to many of us. And not only that, but there are so many other disruptions. Shall we call them disruptions?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you imagine if you had written this today?
Yeah.
You included the pandemic and the insurrection.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing that's amazing is it's really a historical novel. Someone in the chat has said, did you need to read the book before this event? And we're going to try and talk about it so you don't have to have read the book and give it a little bit of context. But the premise is this: it's 2017. It takes place in Syracuse, and this woman leaves her family, and she sees this house. She has a hobby of going and looking at open houses and old houses, and she's sort of obsessed with old houses, and she buys this very dilapidated house, and only when she's driving home to the suburbs does she realize she's going to go live there, and she can't be with her family in the suburbs anymore. But the book sort of sorts through all the possible reasons, and one is the election she takes very personally. She feels that the world has kind of moved against women in a particular way, and but one of the other reasons is that her mother is dying. And one of the other reasons is that she's can't sleep, and she has these terrible menopausal symptoms that are making her a little ragey and a little, and the sleeplessness in particular is making her a little crazy, I think. Not crazy, but a little bit more emotional than she'd be otherwise, I think. So so there's all these things that we're sorting through. And as she gets involved, I mean, we should talk about this, Harriet. She gets involved with these, a lot of the book is very satirical, especially in the beginning. It has a lot of humor in it. And one of the things she does is she meets these kind of wacky women on Facebook who are embracing aging, harridans, hags, and harpies. And they kind of have these intense ideas about how you should, they don't want to be invisible. And one of them is quite charismatic. She's almost and she has this idea that they should do sort of stand-up comedy that's not funny, where they just kind of talk about their bodies.
Is that MH?
Yes, MH, yes.
Yes, you Mad Hatter?
Yeah, the Mad Hatter, or Mother Hubbard. Could be, I like Mad Hatter. Yeah, so she meets one of these women who doesn't turn out to be who she thinks she is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of you satirize the women in the suburbs. You satirize guys in the gym who are
yes. I had a lot of fun making fun of the gym bros, yeah, and the Silicon Valley, those guys too, yeah.
Getting back to the other side of the mother-daughter relationship, and that's the daughter-mother relationship.
Yeah.
And you see, and the mother, Lily, does not really want to burden her daughter with her illness and her mortality.
Yeah.
And what does Sam eventually conclude about that relationship?
Well, I think the thing that's really driving Sam more than anything is the idea of losing her mother. Her mother has told her that she's got a bad diagnosis, but she doesn't want to give too much information to Sam, because Sam is, just as with her daughter, Sam is what you call extra, right? She's constantly, she'll look on, looking up on, the internet, just cures, and kind of like over meddling. And her mother wants her autonomy. Her mother wants her boundaries, and she wants to protect Sam. And Sam is just undone by what's to come. And she just realizes that she hasn't really resolved what is to come. The first part of your life is very different from the second part of your life. And you have to deal, of course, when your parents die, you're dealing with your own mortality. And so I think she's trying to sort of get over herself, in the sense that by the end of the novel, she sort of sees herself in perspective. And she knows that her mother is going to die, and that her mother will still be with her, that there'll be, that she's, and Allie is very close to Sam's mother as well. And there's kind of a very intense granddaughter and grandma relationship that I think is quite interesting, because Sam can't quite cope. And so the grandmother and the granddaughter sort of come together, and they're very close. So I think that she's trying to, I think Sam's really trying to understand her mother's mortality, and so her own, and come to terms with it, which is, I think, kind of where wisdom lies. You have to sort of accept the finiteness of things, but also appreciate them at the same time. So I think it kind of gets into a more spiritual place at the end, where she sort of accepts things, and not in a sad way, I think in just in a wise way, I hope.
Yeah, it does seem like that. And we must talk about the marriage, because that's the central part. And unexpectedly, and I know you did this on purpose, it is not a marriage, the typical marriage where a woman leaves because she's that dissatisfied. I mean, here's a pretty decent guy.
Yeah.
Very decent guy.
Well,
mean,
yes.
in
I mean,
many ways.
he can be a little condescending. I mean, I would say about Matt, I didn't want it to be a bad marriage. I didn't want it to be a loveless marriage. I wanted it wasn't really about the marriage. It was really about her just wanting some space for herself, and, you know, a little separateness to kind of figure her life out. And she does backslide. She takes money from Matt. She ends up sleeping with Matt. There's someone in the chat has asked for no more spoilers, which seems fair enough, but this happens early in the book that she backslides. And I think she loves him and he loves her, but it's not really about him. It's not really, you know, she's doing something. I kind of wanted it to be brave and selfish at the same time. And I sometimes think with female characters, you read a lot of midlife crisis books about men, and they do, you know, they upend their lives, and you don't see women behaving as perversely or selfishly as men sometimes in books. So I kind of wanted it I didn't want it to be that she is, you know, got left by her husband for a younger woman. I didn't want it that, you know, like an unmarried woman, that movie, or that she was worried about, you know, her attractiveness, so she has an affair with a young man. I wanted it really to be more about just these mortal issues and her, you know, who she is and how she will deal with the years to come, as she ages. And so I was kind of working against some of those cliches, and so I wanted the marriage to not be the reason she leaves, that this is terrible marriage. But I mean, I do think Matt is a little condescending he just thinks she's going to get over it. You know, he's just waiting her out, you know.
Yes, that may be true too.
Mm-hmm.
And the house.
Hmm.
So what does the house symbolize? Here is this fixer-upper house in a poor neighborhood, in contrast to a contemporary glass enclosed suburban house. She goes from the suburban house to this fixer-upper craft house in a poor area. What does that mean for her?
I mean, I think her impulse is not, it's just that she loves it and she thinks it's falling apart, but that she can see that it's still beautiful, and it speaks to her. She thinks that she's the only one that can see that. And I think there's this idea, if you lived in a different house, you might be a different person. I think that's sometimes why we fantasize about buying a new house or living in a new house or looking at real estate, because I think we imagine that our lives would be different in a different house in some ways. And I do think that architecture shapes how you live. So she's in a different neighborhood, and what she realizes is that a lot of the things that she's had the privilege of sort of being away from all the inequity and poverty, but doesn't mean that didn't exist the whole time she was in the suburbs. So I think she wants to be in a more, have more clarity about herself, but also about the world and about America and about Syracuse and about, the election made her realize what was already there, but not so present to her attention, is the racism, the misogyny, all the things, the anti-immigrant feeling that came up in that election. And I think she feels culpable. I think she feels a little bit complicit, because she has been sort of blithely living her life and she's a good liberal, but she hasn't really thought about all the parts of the world that are not as privileged as she is in the way that she feels that she ought to. So I think she's trying to really be a better person. I really think it is for her a kind of moral crucible. Like, she's trying to figure out how to be better and more, and have more clarity about herself.
Well, then that, I wasn't going to come to the end yet because I still have some more questions, but that does remind me of the end, because she seems to say that at the end, that I want to be a better person, but there's no real answer to that, is there?
No. And that's the thing I think about for me, for fiction, is, I have these questions that I'm exploring, And I think Sam is, she will contradict herself. She's full of hypocrisy. She's very flawed. But I think what's interesting to me is that she's trying to figure things out and trying to be better. And that is meaningful. That's kind of beautiful to me, that if somebody is, it's hard to know what to do. But she's working on it. And I don't know the answer, but I was interested in asking the questions in a way that I thought people would maybe, I think, recognize. A lot of people have been asking those questions. And, I did write this, I finished this, I was saying that it's a kind of historical fiction. It all takes place in 2017, and I finished it before the pandemic, before George Floyd, before the January 6th insurrection, before Joe Biden got elected, all of that. And that seems, history seems to be happening very fast. And of course, that's just that maybe it always feels that way, but so it almost feels like historical fiction. Although I think so many of the things that were in play when I wrote it are still in play. I think there was a moment there where I thought a lot of this stuff would get resolved after the election, but that's clearly not the case. So, yeah.
No. Something we didn't discuss is aging.
Yeah.
That's aging for women, especially.
Yeah.
And, that's a big one for.
Yeah. I'm shocked. I was shocked when I was going into, started having menopausal symptoms. I was sort of shocked at how, when I talked to some older women, I said, what's up with, and my doctor too. And my doctor's a younger woman. And she's like, oh yeah, that can go on for years. And, the insomnia, you can forget the names of words, brain fog. And I thought, why, geez, I think people should be talking about this more, because I'd heard about hot flashes, and my mother, for some reason, didn't have very many symptoms. She doesn't remember it or something. So I was sort of, I really wanted to put that in the book. I really wanted to make those menopausal symptoms visible. And I think there's a lot of shame around aging for women still, which is just shocking. But, and I think the reason why we don't talk about menopause sometimes is because we're admitting our age, and we're admitting that our bodies are aging. And the other thing about menopause I think is so interesting is that what I think it has for Sam and it has for me is that those symptoms are, you can't ignore the fact that time is passing. I think for people who don't have symptoms, or for men, that their hormones go down sort of gradually, so they can kind of deny it. But if you're having like intense symptoms like that, you can't deny that you're going into a new phase of life, and that you're aging. And so it kind of makes you, I kind of like the fact that it makes you think about your mortality when you still have, you hope, many years left to live. It's sort of a wake-up call and saying, hey, this is finite, you can get plastic surgery, you can do all these things, but your body's still going in one direction, right? And so I was very interested in actually talking about aging, and not about it being about, oh, I'm not attractive anymore, or I have wrinkles, not about that, but more about this idea of time is passing, and you can feel it in your body, and your body is telling you that this is what's happening. And
you seem to have you have a section all about blood.
Yes.
So that's.
Yeah, I really wanted to go there. I just wanted to go there.
And look at the book. I wonder why it's red. Did you thought about this?
No, my publisher came up with that. I love that cover though, because it's kind of in your face, that color, right? It's sort of,
yes. I thought it had to do with blood.
That's good. I like that. Yeah. And I don't know if you noticed this, but the keys have the little faces in them. I didn't even notice that for a long time. It's the keys are also the silhouettes of faces. So I don't know who those two people are supposed to be.
We're winding down because we want to give people a chance to ask questions. So I have one more question for you about process. And I'm a writer too, so I'm sort of interested in how you went about putting this book together. And in terms of structure, your your chapters are very short. So that seemed to be a deliberate choice
Yes.
on your part.
Yes. Oh, and I was
Why
just going to, before I answer that, I just want to say there another person in the chat saying, don't reveal too much. I will tell you that there's a whole bunch of plot that we have not discussed. Really, we're doing very broad strokes. There's plenty of, there's a lot of surprises that we did not discuss. I promise.
You have to discuss something. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
But we've left out a lot. So I hope you still read it. I was going to say, yeah, it kind of starts out, I don't know why, the form gets very strange in the second half, which, it kind of expands. It's narrated between Sam and her daughter, and we won't say sort of all the things that happen in the second part, but different things happen with that narration. And that kind of came up organically as I was working on it. But I like that kind of elliptical style. I like a lot of white space and sort of a lot of breaks, that kind of punctuation of it. And I just felt like the rhythm of the book in terms of how it felt to me. So I think that was pretty organic and intuitive to just the process of doing it. But yeah, that just seemed to be how it evolved. Yeah. In that.
And you thank a lot of people, including your editor, for making the book better. So I was wondering how she made the book better for you. What kind of suggestions did she make?
Most of it was just, I think she wanting more. I put more in about the marriage, having questions about the marriage, and wanting a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that, cutting. So I can get a little carried away with my satirical riffs. So she, trimming to just the funniest bits and not going on about them too much. That kind of thing. Nothing, nothing too major, but a lot of brilliant, smaller things. Yeah.
And I did ask a question to your agent, Milani Jackson, and I was wondering if it would be hard to talk about these subjects and sell a book about female menopause. And she said, no, not today. Everything is discussed today, so there's no problem about that. And in addition, you're such a wonderful author, so everybody wanted to publish your book.
Well, that's nice to hear.
All right, so we're going to then go on to asking questions, and the audience can please put your questions in the chat, and Debbie on or off will ask the questions from what you put in the chat, and then please stay on till the end because we have two more wonderful authors who are going to be in our author series this season. Okay, Debbie.
Okay. One of the questions that we have is asking, do you have a daughter who is or was a teen? The scenes just seem so real.
Yes, I do. And I had to, she's very different from Allie, and that's quite deliberate, but I definitely get the, I do have an ear for the way that she speaks and, and the way that she argues. And I did run some scenes by her, and she was, at one point, I had a scene from Allie's point of view. You see that same scene from Allie's point of view. A couple scenes you see from the mom and then you see from the daughter. And I read it to my daughter and she said, that's exactly what I would be thinking then. How did you know that? So she was all for it. And as long as I made Allie very different from her, which I did, but yeah.
And another question, I'm interested in your sections about Clara Loomis. The question, is she fictional? And the history of Syracuse. And could you talk about your decisions to include both?
Yes. So Clara Loomis is Sam works part-time in this historical house for this woman, Clara Loomis, who is a kind of problematic 19th century women's rights activist. She has this, she kind of has this weird, she's a reproductive rights activist, but she also has this weird eugenics thing, which actually a lot of reproductive rights activists kind of veered into that. And she ends up running away to the Oneida community when she's a little girl, this woman. And the Oneida community is a real place. It's a real Christian perfectionist community that was very successful in the 19th century, and it ends up, Oneida silverware comes from that. And they had these very interesting ideas about complex marriage, where everybody's married to everyone in the community, so you have sex with everybody, and everybody shares the children. And they also had this idea of cultivating people the way you'd cultivate plants for spirituality, which is the eugenics part. So a lot of that was real, but Clara Loomis is completely imaginary. So I wanted to have the freedom to kind of do what I wanted with her. So I didn't want it to be an actual person that I was sort of hemmed in by their actual experiences. But she is inspired by a lot of pieces from women that I read about. And I think it was interesting to me because the alley portion of the book has a lot of interesting questions about sexuality and consent, and I see that kind of mirrored in Clara's young life. And I also wanted, to see Clara, as compromised as she gets later, her as a young person, she's very idealistic, and she just wants to escape the constraints of Victorian society for women. And I thought, and the reason why I include that and the Syracuse history is because I think one of the things that I've always been interested in my books is just the way that the current moment is really shaped by all the moments that came before. That's true of a person, and that's true of a place, and it's certainly true of a country. And in America, sometimes we get this kind of attitude that, it's all new all the time, and we forget sort of how complex and strange the history, the points that got us here. So I really wanted to sort of, and when you're in an old city like Syracuse or New York, where there are remnants of the past all around you, when you start to think about the changes that have, the history of a place, if you go to the Newtown Creek between, Brooklyn and Queens, and you see all these weird corporations that are there, but also it's very polluted, and you sort of think, well, how did this happen? How did this get this way? And so I was asking a lot of those questions by what remains. And so that's why, and it could have been any city, it didn't have to be Syracuse, but Syracuse is an interesting place because it does have such, in the 19th century, it had so many reform things that were happening here, abolition and women's rights, and the Erie Canal was kind of like a conduit for information. So I think it was a good place to have a contemporary American story that was also engaged with the past. I hope it was. Yeah.
So I'm interested in the fact that your book came out in the middle of the pandemic, and how has that been different?
Oh, good question.
Having a book come out and getting feedback from your readers, and you said you joined some virtual book clubs. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So it was very weird because the whole book tour was virtual. I mean, I've done some in-person events this month, and that's weird too, because you wear a mask, everybody's masked, you take off the mask to do the reading, then you put the mask back on, and then you're signing books pretty close to people. But yeah, so it was all virtual, and it was kind of great because people could come from all over the country, all over the world to events, and that was exciting. And you could get writers to do conversations with you that were, lived in another place. That was exciting. But I really missed connecting with people afterwards, where you sign the book and you talk to them. And I really miss the booksellers talking, and then it's weird. We turn this off, and then it's just quiet, and you're all alone, and you're all just like, oh. So it was very strange in that sense, but I also didn't have to do a lot of traveling, which was, I like traveling, but sometimes that can be tiring. So it was kind of a mixed bag. I do think that of all the arts, writers we had a pretty easy time in the pandemic, because one, we like to stay alone by ourselves, and two, people like to read. And I think a lot of people rediscovered reading during the pandemic. So I think, people are buying and reading fiction, which is great, I think. Yeah. And someone put in the chat that they are glad that I left the reference to Eileen Fisher in the Eileen Fisher crowd. I have, for some reason, I've gotten a lot of reaction to that reference to Eileen Fisher in the book. I kind of make fun of Eileen Fisher clothes in the book, even though I own Eileen Fisher clothes. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
That's okay. Another question. Are you working on another novel? Will it be told within the context of a pandemic and or a challenging democracy and a rising Me Too movement?
Yeah, those are all good questions. Sorry, my light just went out. I'm at the very preliminary stages of a novel. So I can't really answer those questions, but I'm working on an opera that the reason why I mentioned the Newtown Creek, the opera is actually going to be performed on the Newtown Creek in Greenpoint. And it's a kind of environmental, it's an opera that deals with the environment and from the perspective of Newtown Creek, which is one of the most polluted waterways in America. But it has it's beautiful. It has an incredible view of the city. So I'm collaborating with some people on a kind of environmental opera about the Newtown Creek. And when I'm done with that, then I'll start another book, or I'll get back to another book. And I do like to write about what's happening in the culture, the wider culture, but I try to keep it very focused on really specific characters. So that probably it's hard to imagine that wouldn't figure in, but I'm not sure. I was intrigued by doing the historical portions of this. So part of me is thinking some historical thing might be fun too. So I don't know.
Dana, I have another question that I did not ask that I'm curious about. And that is the whole idea of this disruptor culture. The young girl, Allie, is involved in YAD. Now, did you make that up?
Yes, that's all made up.
Yeah. Well, tell the audience a little bit about that.
So
sure.
Allie belongs to a group through her school called YAD, Young American Disruptors, and they're like an entrepreneurial, group where you get mentored and you do pitches. It's kind of inspired by, Debate Club or Model UN or those kinds of things, but it's done with the Silicon Valley approach to disrupting, kind of making fun, definitely making fun of some of the tech bro ethos. This developer who gets a lot of tax breaks and takes old structures and turns them into, ugly apartments for rich Silicon Valley dudes. So yeah, I was very interested in sort of critiquing that Silicon Valley. I mean, it's too easy to satirize them. So I really kind of moved into satirizing the developer more, but he just partakes in some of that stuff. I mean, it's sort of almost self-satirizing, but all the language that the Silicon Valley entrepreneurial types use, they're kind of I could find it here, but the things that the way they talk about themselves and the specific jargon that they use is just hilarious to me. So I do make fun of it. Yes, it's true, I do, and they deserve it.
Debbie, do we
So
have-
someone is asking, what did you major in during your studies? Your remarks about Syracuse and the ideas around it sound as if you did a lot of research for your work, including historical.
Yeah, I did. I do. Thank you for that question. I did study for a while philosophy and particularly labor history. I was really interested in labor history and being a community organizer for a while. But yeah, literature and writing ended up being my main focus. But as a writer, I have always really liked doing research. even when I'm writing about contemporary things. So I do find it as a way of immersing myself in the world and going very, and I think if you get really obsessed and you go really deep, you find these little details that make the fiction come alive. And so I do find it really compelling. I can overdo it sometimes because I just get, I think it's a way of procrastinating as well. But I don't want to make mistakes. If I'm going to write about something, I want to be accurate. So I do ask other people who know more than I do to help me. I mean, in my last book, I wrote a lot about film, and I wrote about people who do phone phreaking, which is kind of like hacking, old-fashioned hacking on telephones. And it was so technical, and I had to get somebody to help me and say, just read this and tell me I didn't make any mistakes. So I do often ask people. And for this book, I work at a university, I teach at Syracuse University. So I had a historian friend look at this part, had somebody else look at that part. So that's why my acknowledgements are so long, because I do ask for a lot of help. Yeah.
Okay, Harriet, back to you to talk about the
Okay.
next two author
Okay,
webinars.
unless there are any other questions. Did you enjoy writing this book?
I did. I love writing. Yeah, I love writing. I mean, it's hard, but I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Well, Dana, thank you very much for coming and talking to us about this book. I know a lot of our registered listeners will want to read it now. There are so many issues in this book that can be explored. And we are so happy that you came. We're so happy for the audience. And I'd like to tell everybody that Joshua Henkin, author of Morningside Heights, will be with us on November 16th. And on January 11th, Hilma Wolitzer will be our author guest. And Hilma is 90 some years old. So we'll be able to get her perspective about her long career as a writer, as well as Joshua. And we thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Those are both those writers. That sounds great. Thank you for the great questions, and thank you, Harriet, for your questions and for inviting me. This makes me very happy to be here with all these great women. Thank you.
Thank you so much.